Good morning. It is Wednesday, the 10th of December. I'm Maeve McMahon, and this is Europe Today, Euronews' daily live fix of European news and analysis. Coming up today, Europe is a decaying group of nations led by, quote, weak people. The words of President Donald Trump. Speaking to the European Parliament, Europe's foreign chief, Kaja Kallas, downplayed the slurs, refusing to get into a, quote, word fight. But the EU Council President, Antonio Costa, asked the US President to show respect. For more on this story, I'm joined here in the studio by Euronews' EU editor, Maria Tadeo. Good morning, Maria.
Good morning.
Fill us in on this story. And does President Trump not have a point, though? Because EU leaders are weak. They're never working together, but often alone, defending their own interests.
Well, look, it is clear that the EU does not have the sort of presidential powers that come with an executive order. That is not how the European Union works. Although I should note, in the past week and the sort of political storm around the EU, diplomats I've spoken with in Brussels say this is not constructive criticism. It's been a pounding from the U.S. administration. And just to give everyone up to speed, in the past 5 days, the U.S. administration, the president and people adjacent to the U.S. government have said the EU is weak politically, correct. They are too attached to green policies. They are risking now civilizational erasure. There is too much illegal immigration. We want Europe to stay Europe. We will cultivate relations with European patriotic parties. And there is a system within the EU that does not promote freedom of speech. Again, for some of the diplomats I spoke with, they say this is not criticism, it's political interference. Nonetheless, President Trump yesterday repeated they do believe in the U.S. that Europe is not going in the right direction. For the Europeans, of course, this is language that has rattled them. Let's take a look.
Look, Europe has to be very careful. They're doing a lot. We want to keep Europe Europe. Europe is going in some bad directions. It's very very bad for the people. We don't want Europe to change so much. They're going in some very bad direction.
Parts of the document the US published are understandable, but some of it is unacceptable for us, from the European point of view. That the Americans want to save democracy in Europe now, I don't see any need for that. If it needed to be saved, we would manage that alone.
And that is, of course, the German Chancellor. And Maeve, just to be very clear, in the U.S. national security strategy, they do say that the Europeans are an ally to the U.S. But the question now in the EU is whether America's Trump, do they really want to work with the European institution? And is there even a plan to perhaps weaken the EU from within? I'm not saying there is one, but that is clearly a question that is permeating in Brussels and has come up this week. And it's great to have the ambassador, of course, to debrief.
Indeed, Maria Tadeo, our EU News editor, thank you so much for that. And as she said there, coming up, we will be joined, in fact, by the US Ambassador to the European Union, Ambassador Andrew Puzder, a former business executive and well-known media commentator. This year, Andrew Puzder was appointed the US Ambassador to the European Union. So he is now literally the eyes and the ears of President Trump right here in Brussels. So, Ambassador Puzder, thank you so much for joining us. What a day to have you with us here on Europe Today. There's a lot to digest. But first, let's just start perhaps with President Trump's attempts to end the war in Ukraine. Is President Trump trying to push President Zelensky into signing a deal before Christmas?
You know, I'm not involved in the negotiations on Ukraine, and I'm reluctant to comment. We've got Ambassador Witkoff, we've got Secretary Rubio, Jared Kushner, people that are involved, and anything I might say would, since I'm not involved, might damage those negotiations.
But the fact that you're based in Brussels, you do understand how the Europeans work. So why do you think the Russians are getting such soft treatment?
Again, I'm not any comments I made in that respect could impact the negotiations, and it just
you might lose your job.
Look, we all want peace in Ukraine. We all want the killing to stop. And I don't want to make a comment that might damage the negotiations that could lead to that peace. And since I'm not involved, it would be easy for me to make a mistake and say the wrong thing. So.
Indeed, especially on live TV. You don't want to make that mistake. But perhaps you could talk to us about how the US administration feel about the frozen Russian assets. Is the US on board with this?
Again, the United States hasn't taken a position on that. That's a European event, a European solution. And the European, I'm not sure that all the Europeans agree on it. I know how the Belgians feel. I know how the rest of Europe feels. So that's not something, again, that's not something we're going to get into the middle of. That's a European decision.
But there are reports that the US administration have been calling bilaterally EU capitals, telling them not to sign up to this deal.
Yeah, I've heard those reports. I don't know anybody who's done that, and I haven't spoken to anybody at the EU who's gotten that kind of contact. So again, that's not. This is just not. I'm happy to talk to you about the economy or any areas you want to talk about, or President Trump's comments. But while there's negotiations going on to end this horrific war in Ukraine, it just would be irresponsible of me to comment because I'm just not involved in those negotiations.
You're not involved. But please, I'm sure our listeners would love you to comment on President Trump's plans and the various comments we've heard across the last couple of days on the national security strategy. Is this a campaign, do you think, Ambassador, to dismantle the European Union?
Well, you know, it's interesting. The coverage of the national security strategy, when I read it, I thought, this thing's going to be terrible. I went and read it, and it's really not that bad. The section on Europe is titled A Proposal for European Greatness. It's not called We Don't Like Europe, we want Europe to go away. And if you read down a little bit, it says that Europe is, I think I'm going to get the quote right, Europe is strategically and culturally vital to the United States. You read a little further, it says our transatlantic trade relationship, which is the largest trade relationship in the world, is a pillar of the global economy and of American prosperity. So I did not read it at all as an attempt to dissolve the European Union.
But does it suggest going back to nation states?
Well, I think the thrust of it is that you do have 27 sovereign states. So it's not going back to sovereign states. You have 27 sovereign states. The question is, how much of their sovereignty did they give up to be part of an economic union? Did they give up the sovereignty to determine who comes into or out of their countries? Did they give up the sovereignty on cultural issues that might be different in Eastern Europe than they are in Western Europe? So
when it says Europe's weak and decaying, who's weak? Who is President Trump referring to?
Well, if you look at the European Union overall, you'll see the GDP, the nominal GDP, it was ahead of the United States, the European Union, in 2011. So that's 14 years ago. For me, that doesn't seem so long ago. That's recent memory. Today, if you include the United Kingdom, it's about 20% below that the IMF is projecting for this year. If you take the United Kingdom out, it's almost a third below. This is a huge drop. And even more impressively, I think for citizens in Europe, for the people of Europe, GDP per capita, in other words, economic growth in a country per person, GDP per capita in Germany, the industrial giant of Europe, is now below that of the state of West Virginia in the 49th worst state.
Europeans know that as well. I mean, they don't really need this document to state it, but just this idea of
you asked what's the weakness, and then if you look at Spain, Italy, France, the French economy, and you look at the EU overall, and include the UK, I'll include the UK in this too, just for fairness. They're below the state of Mississippi, which is the 50th lowest GDP per capita U.S. state. So when you ask where's the weakness, this is an economic weakness.
So it's not pointing at a particular person. And just this idea of Europe staying Europe, what exactly does that mean? Does that mean a white Christian Europe?
No, I think it means, and I would say this for the United States too, when people are immigrating into the United States, if you're not going to contribute economically, if you don't want to become a part of the society, if in fact you reject the basic tenets of that society, it's probably people we don't want. Those are the kind of people that come in, and you see an increase in the crime rate. You see a decrease in the kind of cultural values people have. I think there are even European cities where the police now are afraid to go in or don't go into certain sections. They're governed by different legal standards. I think what he's saying is that that we don't want to see Europe lose its identity as Europe because
Ambassador, we're going to have to leave it there. But do come back to us, please, again, soon here on Europe Today, because we didn't get to talking about Elon Musk, because, of course, he's furious about the €120 million fine that Brussels sent him last week for failing to meet transparency rules. Our reporter, Jakob Janis, has been trying to get inside his head of the richest man of the world. Take a look.
Trying to understand Elon is like trying to assemble IKEA furniture in the dark. Except we have no instructions and the pieces keep changing shape. We Europeans often dismiss him as a barbaric cowboy. We pride ourselves on being the educated adults in the room. Well, if we are so clever, let's prove it. And for that, let's use Carl Jung to talk about Elon. The Swiss psychologist defined archetypes. But there is a catch. For every positive face, there is a shadow. First, the creator. He is the visionary building rockets that one day will take him to Mars. But his shadow is the anarchist. He treats SpaceX explosions as data, and he is willing to burn billions and occasionally break laws just to see if his toys work. Second, the ruler. If money is the measurement of success, he's the most profitable CEO in the world who just secured $1 trillion deal at Tesla to keep him. But his shadow is the tyrant. When he took over Twitter, he didn't just restructure it, he decapitated it. He fired 80% of the staff in weeks, demanding hardcore loyalty just to prove he holds the crown. And third, the jester, the internet troll posting memes that people laugh at. But here, the shadow is the nihilist, the cruel trickster who retweets posts comparing the EU to the Fourth Reich. But not for the lols. He simply believes nothing matters anymore. Elon is a spectacle we cannot look away from. Maybe he's just seeking validation from his favorite former reality TV star. But that, on the other side, would be Freud. So, Mr. Musk, which Elon are you today?
Jakub Janis reporting for us there. But now going back to the ongoing war in Ukraine. As you're hearing a lot on your news lately, Europe is grappling with financing Ukraine in the long term. But meanwhile, NATO countries are already working with private tech on how to best resolve the struggles on the front line using drones instead of manpower. For more on this story, we can cross over now to our NATO correspondent, Shona Murray, who's actually in Riihimäki in Finland for us. Good morning, Shona. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Just tell us, where are you exactly and what have you been finding out?
So this is Riihimäki, a small garrison town about 2 hours from the Russian border. As we know, Finland has the largest border with Russia inside NATO, 1,350 kilometres. So this town sees itself really as a future innovation hub for the defence industry. As I said, it's a garrison town. I'm standing outside Sacco, which is a rifle manufacturer. It's been here since 1921, but it's very much expanding. I spoke to the mayor here yesterday, who said that giving away a whole street to allow that expansion. So what we saw yesterday was a collaboration between the public and private sector, and of course a demonstration of NATO's eastern flank deterrence line. So as you said there, drones, unmanned ground vehicles which are used to transport wounded soldiers from the battlefield, also to transport ammunition. These are very important on the front line in Ukraine, but also vitally important to protect Europe's eastern flank from a lot of the incursions we've seen over the last few months, whether it's hybrid war or airspace incursions. Maeve?
And I believe you spoke to a Ukrainian soldier, Shona, who's just left the front line. How is he doing and what did he say?
Yes, what was interesting about yesterday is not just soldiers that were there, Ukrainian soldiers who were in Kherson, but also private sector defence industry, which have also spent the last few weeks in Kherson because they're obviously trying out all of their new drones and their new weapons on the battlefield. So I caught up with Alexander Voitko and I asked him about the situation in terms of development when it comes to innovation and also their counterpart, the Russians.
Russians are moving now at many points of front line, but we are killing many of them too. We rely mostly on drones, so-called drones wall. We use all types of drones, small kamikaze FPV drones, bombers, fixed ISR wings, and middle strike wings, kamikaze, all type of drones.
Alexander Voitko and, of course, our Shona Murray there reporting for us live from Finland. So thank you so much to her for that. And thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of Europe Today. For more news and analysis, you can check out euronews.com. But thank you so much for watching. Take care and see you very soon here on Euronews.